领导者适应不断变化的地缘政治的5种方式。
Have you been sleeping for the last 30 years? Well, if we believe former Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, we all have been napping since the early 1990s, at least geopolitically speaking. Why? Well, join me at the Munich Security Conference, one of the world's foremost conferences on national security and defense, on the 19th of February 2022. 5 days before the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, with 190,000 soldiers waiting at the border, leaders such as Kamala Harris, Ursula von der Leyen, Antony Blinken, and Volodymyr Zelensky are discussing the future of war and peace in Munich. In this unique, historic, and tense situation, Prime Minister Morawiecki urges the world to wake up from years and decades of geopolitical napping.
Wake up from years and decades of geopolitical napping.
这个知识点的含义是指醒悟于几年或几十年的地缘政治沉睡状态。Napping 是一种口语俚语，表示长时间的休息或沉睡。
So you'll get a wake-up call. In fact, when we look at our realities, personal, business, political, we see the outsized impact of geopolitics on all our lives. Now, what is interesting is that while companies are struggling with the challenges of AI revolution, of high interest rates, of labor shortages, of climate change, they tend to overlook geopolitics. Luckily, I think that we have a window of opportunity to really up our game.
Up our game.
这个短语的意思是提高自己的水平或能力，通常用于工作、学习等方面。
To develop what I call the geopolitical muscle. No worries, I have no shares in any gym chain, but I think that developing a geopolitical muscle, meaning having the possibility to understand the challenges and the navigation of the new realities, is key. Now, talking about new realities, I lead the BCG Henderson Institute and BCG's Center for Geopolitics. And in this role, I have spoken over the last 2 years with 500 CEOs, executive committees, and boards around the world, literally from southern Chile to northern Japan. In these discussions, my counterparts ask me, Nicholas, how will the world in the 2030s be? How is our future? Well, I'm not an oracle, but I like to work with scenarios. What are scenarios? Scenarios are images of the future. And you know what's really beautiful about scenarios? They're precisely wrong, but generally right. So, what's the most favorite scenario all over the world? From southern Chile to northern Japan. It's a scenario which we call back to the future.
Back to the future.
这个知识点的含义是回到过去，回到曾经的时光。它通常用于描述一种回归往日的感觉或情绪。
It's actually the world of the 1990s, the early 2000s, time where democracy was prevailing, free trade was flowing, international organizations like the UN, WTO, World Bank were functioning. And of course, many of us grew up in this period. So no wonder that we want to be in a scenario like this one. But I have bad news for you. This scenario is very unlikely. Then there's the other extremes. People saying, we will end up in a global escalation of conflicts.
Global escalation of conflicts.
这个知识点的含义是指全球范围内的冲突升级。 它通常用于描述战争、恐怖主义等安全威胁的扩散。
We have seen huge conflicts with huge humanitarian toll and macroeconomic impact in Ukraine, in the Middle East, in Sudan. And we see here, obviously, the worry of these people to say, well, will we see a proliferation of conflicts, notably in the Indo-Pacific, which will lead to an economic Armageddon? Well, here I tend to be slightly more optimistic, and I believe that this scenario of global escalation, notably because of the deep interlinkages in the Indo-Pacific, political and economic, is not likely to happen, at least in the short to medium term. So now you will ask me and say, Nicholas, okay, so no back to the future, no global...
Back to the future.
这个知识点的含义是指回到过去，重新体验某个经历或时期。惯用法可以用于描述回忆过去，重新体验某个经历等场景。
Escalation, so what's happening? Well, I think the most likely scenarios for the 2030 is the multipolar world. What does it mean? Well, since 1945, we had a world that was dominated by one or two superpowers.
Superpowers.
超级大国的意思，指拥有极大的政治、经济和军事实力的大国。这个词组在英语中非常常用，尤其是在谈论国际关系时。
I believe that the 2030s will see many powers, many spheres of influence. And let me go through a few of them. First, there is what I call the Western Bloc. United States, Europe, allies in North America, allies in Asia Pacific. This bloc is characterized by democracy and market economy. This bloc is collaborating technologically in topics such as AI, renewable.
Technologically.
这个词组表示一种技术上的合作或发展。例如 This bloc is collaborating technologically in topics such as AI, renewables, medtech and so on. 这块区域在技术上与 AI, 可再生能源、医疗技术等领域进行合作。
Renewables, medtech and so on. Even militarily, this bloc has evolved. We have seen the reawakening of NATO as a response to the war in Ukraine. And the US has developed a very interesting network of alliances in the Asia-Pacific, including countries such as Japan, Korea, India, Australia, and others, under interesting acronyms such as AUKUS or Quad. Then there is a second bloc, which I describe as the new Eastern Bloc.
Eastern Bloc.
东方集团是指在冷战期间，苏联和其他社会主义国家所组成的政治联盟。这个词组通常用于描述这些国家之间的经济、政治和文化联系。
And that's actually China and Russia growing together, with countries such as North Korea and Iran joining this bloc. The economic reality is that Russia is pumping gas into China via pipelines with the main power of Siberia 1. And China is sending cars to flood Russian roads. But also technologically, this bloc is trying to become independent, be it space exploration, semiconductors, and so on. The most interesting part of it is that technologically and militarily, this bloc is going to a completely different level. If you see the Iranian kamikaze drones in the skies over Kiev, or the
Kamikaze drones.
这个词组指的是一种自杀式无人机，通常用于军事目的。它源于日本的传统自杀式飞机。
joint naval drills of the Iranian, the Russian, and the Chinese navies in the Gulf of Oman, March of this year, military cooperation is becoming reality. And then there's a third bloc, and I don't call it bloc, I don't want to call it bloc because I think it's more of a grouping of countries, where we have a series of middle powers, regional powers, such as India, Indonesia, the GCC
Regional powers.
这个词组指的是地区内具有较大影响力的国家或组织。
countries that are playing a role of staying in balance between those two blocks. These countries have huge assets, be it natural resources, abundant talent, interesting geographical position. And they leverage these assets to develop a non-aligned path between
Non-aligned path.
这个短语指的是不加入任何大国联盟或集团的政策。
the two other blocks. And they develop spheres of influence across Asia, Africa, the Middle East.
Spheres of influence.
这个词组指的是一个国家或组织对其他地区的影响力和控制权。
And Latin America. So, we are in this multipolar world. What does this mean for companies and corporate leaders? Companies and corporate leaders need to navigate and they need to develop a geopolitical muscle. Remember? Corporate workout.
Corporate workout.
这个知识点的含义是，公司需要进行一项新的挑战或任务，类似于个人健身。
So let me go through 5 exercises that companies need to do. First, build resilient supply chains. The operating model where you used to have a large factory at the lowest possible cost location on Earth is dead. We have seen how pandemic, war, and tariffs are destroying supply chains overnight.
Destroying supply chains overnight.
这个知识点的含义是指突然、迅速的破坏供应链。这种表达方式常见于商业或经济讨论中。
The new reality is you need to have a network of small factories all over the world. You need to have flexible supply chains that are able to respond to external shocks. Exercise 2. Prepare for continued inflation and price volatility. I know no one wants to hear it, but I think the current discussion of price cuts is interesting. But the reality is that the cheap money of the 2010s is gone. Much more real is a continuous inflationary pressure. We will
Inflationary pressure.
这个词组指的是经济中的通货膨胀压力。它通常用于描述经济增长速度超过了物价增长速度，导致货币购买力的下降。
through geopolitical shifts, increased military spending, and the cost of energy transition. So companies need to prepare in their investment and pricing decisions how to handle this continued inflationary pressure and pricing volatility. Third, design your organization for a fragmented world. The time where you were handling a company and a multinational company from one headquarter is gone. In a multipolar world, where you have different economic systems, political ideologies, and technical stacks, you will need to set up your company as a collection of regional command centers that are agile and independent and can perfectly adapt to the new realities. Fourth, prepare for cybersecurity. In a multipolar world,
In a multipolar world.
这个知识点的含义是指世界上有多个强国或经济体相互竞争和平衡。这种情况下，每个国家或经济体都需要独立思考和行动。
AI and asymmetric warfare are likely to become the new normal. Companies need to prepare for cyber attacks, both on a system level, but also
On a system level, but also on an employee level and a culture level.
这个知识点的含义是指公司需要在系统层面、员工层面和文化层面都准备好应对网络攻击。 这句话使用了一个常见的词组 on a level， 意为在某个层面上。
On an employee level and a culture level. Fifth, and this is the core of it, develop the geopolitical muscle. So what is it? It's about talent, it's about decision making, and it's about leadership. Talent. Companies need to hire and develop.
Hiring and developing talent.
这个知识点的含义是指公司需要招聘和培养能够感知到地缘政治变化、思考场景、重新设计供应链以及定义新战略的员工。
Develop talent that is able to sense geopolitical shifts, that is able to think in scenarios, that is
Think in scenarios.
这个知识点的含义是指能够思考和预测不同场景下的结果。
able to redesign supply chains, that is able to define new strategies.
Define new strategies.
这个知识点的含义是指定义新的战略和计划。
Second, decision making. While investment decisions and project decisions and strategies need, of course, to consider dimensions in finance, in legal, and HR, it is critical to inject a geopolitical perspective in the way.
Inject a geopolitical perspective.
这个知识点的含义是指在决策中注入地缘政治视角。
How you make decisions.
In the way how you make decisions.
这个知识点的含义是指个人或组织在做出决定时的方法和方式。它强调了决策过程中考虑多种因素和思路的重要性。
And last on leadership, let me dream a little bit. I still think that managers continue to be good managers, but I would hope that their decision is also influenced by the way how historians, economists, and politicians decide and think in order to pivot their strategies to the new realities. So let me conclude this wake-up call with a simple alternative. Either you continue with your geopolitical napping, or you build your geopolitical muscle.
Build your geopolitical muscle.
这个知识点的含义是指通过外交和政治手段来增强国家的国际影响力。
Thank you very much.
恳请点赞、订阅我们的频道，一起学习演讲中的实用英语。